Please welcome Semafor co-founder and CEO, Justin Smith.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see such a vibrant crowd here today at Gallup's Great Hall. I'm Justin Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Semafor. Hopefully it's not your first interaction with our brand. We are a very young brand. We are about to turn 1 year old, so still in diapers, proverbially, but we launched 11 months ago, and we were created by one of the most successful and experienced teams in news media from a lot of the top global news brands. And our mission at birth is to try to address this incredibly important crisis of consumer distrust in news through a different type of journalism that's high quality, intelligent, independent, and transparent. We're pursuing this mission both here, obviously in DC, across the United States, but also around the world. In fact, when we launched with 2 editions, one US edition and 1 edition for sub-Saharan Africa. Semafor Africa has 16 journalists across the continent in Africa, which compares very favorably to all the global news brands that have effectively not focused on that market. As part of our DC coverage, which will be more relevant to many of you here, we've built one of the most dynamic newsrooms in this town with some of the some great name brand journalists like Dave Weigel and Ben Smith and others. And every morning we publish Semafor Principles 5 days a week, which is a daily intelligence briefing on the most important insights that you need to understand truly what's going on in this town. It's a crowded market, but give us a shot. I think you'll find that we operate at a higher altitude than some of our competitors intellectually, and are scrupulously nonpartisan in all of our efforts. Today's event brings this type of journalism to life with this edition of Principles Live, featuring Maryland Governor Wes Moore, which is a really, really great thrill for all of us at Semafor to host him. Wes Moore was sworn in this January as the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland. Obviously a rising star in American politics, amongst many other things. I won't go through an introduction because Steve will do it. And of course, he'll be interviewed by Semafor's co-founder and editor-at-large, Steve Clemons. So please join me in welcoming Governor Moore and Steve Clemons to the stage.
Thank you so much, Justin. Governor, have a seat.
Thank you.
I tell Justin it's much better when we start to lower expectations, you know, not to raise them, but there we go. Governor, it's really great to be with you, and I just want to give a shout. I rarely do this, but Stacy Plaskett, stand up. Stacy, where are you? So she is our representative for the Virgin Islands, who's a great part of America. Her husband, Jonathan. I know there are a lot of former members, but you know, formers don't count in here. No, they do. We love you all, but I wanted to recognize the Congresswoman from the Virgin Islands. It's great. So, since it was out there, Governor, that you were going to be here, I'm just going to start tough and federal, and we'll get to Maryland. But people have flooded me and said, you know, Democrats have flooded me and said, President Biden has set us up. He's given us a bad choice. Why don't you get Wes Moore to primary him? Any interest in higher office?
Good morning, everybody. No, none. And first, let me say, I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of friends and a lot of constituents, so this is really nice. I feel like
my mayor is in town here. Yeah. I just saw it. From Chestertown, Maryland.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And one of our extraordinary mayors. You know, I think it's really important for people to remember that I'm probably the most improbable governor in this country.
In what way?
Well, I mean, I'm a person who has never come from a political lineage. I don't come from a political family. I never run for office before in my life. I'm the son of an immigrant single mother who didn't get her first job that gave her benefits until I was 14 years old. Right, and by the way, and this is a woman who went on to earn a master's degree. So it's important to note, because when we're having conversations about inequitable pay between men and women, or inequitable pay between people of color and non, like, this is not an academic exercise to me, Like, I've seen this, I've lived it. And, I'm a person who graduated from a 2-year college. I'm a person who joined the Army when I was 17 years old. I'm a person who, was polling at 1% when I first decided I want to run for governor. I mean, literally, I'm not voting was polling higher than
You're
West
just justifying and explaining why my inbox is full. of people, But let me just get to a serious point. I mean, I know you're non-traditional in so many different ways, but I live in Maryland and I see this there, and I just want to be honest. And I think you went through an interesting election where your predecessor did not endorse his GOP nominee that followed him, stayed out of that race, Larry Hogan. You've come in and you've found a way to talk to a lot of different communities there. So as you approach it, I am interested in the sort of how do you be a Democrat today and talk to a bigger audience than just the small audience of the Democratic Party. So as you look at your North Star and you're communicating about the needs of the state right now, how do you talk to the part of the community that may have supported your opponent or may have been a Larry Hogan supporter?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've done is we've tried to govern how we campaigned. And when I say we campaigned everywhere, we campaigned everywhere. We were going in every single part of the state. I mean, we're going a lot of places when people are saying, there's not a lot of Democrats here. And
That's the Eastern Shore.
Well, but I tell you what, we ended up winning. Counties in the Eastern Shore that a Democrat had never won before. Right. I mean, so when we ended up receiving, even though we started at 1%, ended up receiving more individual votes than any person who'd ever run for governor in the history of the state of Maryland. And the reason I bring that up is this: just mathematically, you don't get to that number by just winning Democrats. Mathematically, it's impossible, right? We won Democrats, we won independents, we won a good chunk of Republicans. And I think part of the reason is that we showed up. We were going everywhere. And when people would say there's not a lot of Democrats, my answer would be, yeah, but there's a lot of Marylanders. And I plan on being their governor too. And I tell you, one of the first, in fact, the first official visit that I made as governor was to a place called Lonaconing, which is far western Maryland. I mean, basically, you could throw a stone almost to West Virginia. Right? And they were having a water crisis, so they're having a boil water advisory. And we went out there. And I was meeting with the mayor, Mayor Coburn, who has since become a very good friend. I was speaking with him yesterday. And he said to me, Governor, do me a favor. Turn 365 degrees. And I turned 360 degrees, and I did. And he said, here's the guarantee I can give you. Everywhere you looked, you did not see a Democrat within 5 miles of where you were standing. And he said, but you're the first governor that's been here since 1996. So you got to show up. And I think part of the reason that we've been able to really build an interesting and frankly a pretty sticky coalition in our state. I mean, we introduced 10 bills in my first legislative session. We introduced 10 bills. We didn't just go 10 for 10 on the legislation we introduced. We went 10 for 10 bipartisan. Democrat and Republican votes on every single bill that we introduce. It takes work, it takes commitment, and it takes showing up. And I think that's something that our administration is committed to.
You're the first black governor in Maryland's 246-year history, and I have to say, when I listen to a Bob Dylan song that talks about lynchings in Caroline County, when I know Kent County and its terrible legacy, Queen Anne's County, other counties, right, many other counties and their terrible, terrible legacies of race relations. We have some great, very inspiring annual event called Legacy Day, of looking at the contributions of African Americans in that community and raising them, because it's unknown history to most people. I'm interested into what degree you talk about race and identity as you are bringing the state together, or how much you want to dissolve race as a factor as you govern.
No, I think you've got to talk about it because it's a reality of our history. Maryland has an extraordinary history, and one that just of true jewels and assets, but you can't talk about that and ignore some of the realities of Queen Anne's County and Kent County. You can't talk about it without understanding that Baltimore, my home, is a remarkable place with extraordinary history. It's also the birthplace of redlining. Literally the national birthplace of deciding who could live where based on the color of your skin. that we started our inauguration, literally our inauguration morning. We very intentionally, I started off down at the docks with a couple hundred people in the Annapolis docks, which is gorgeous. It's also one of the earliest and largest enslavement ports in our country's history. And we intentionally started the inauguration down at the docks, had a wreath-laying ceremony. And then myself, the family, Lieutenant Governor, and a couple hundred other people, we marched from the docks to the State House. And it was very, very intentional. And it was intentional, and we did it because, and I said, we did it not because I wanted to make people feel bad, but it's because I wanted people to understand the collective journey that we've been on together. I didn't do it because I wanted to rehash history, but I wanted us to understand it, that we were not going to have an inauguration. We were not going to have that inauguration without every single Marylander understanding our history. And being able to do that, it's not, and part of the reason when I hear this attack on history or people penning books and all this kind of stuff, it's like we have to understand that the reason that people are giving for why this is happening, and they're saying, well, it's because we don't want people to feel bad. We don't want people to feel disengaged. That's not it. It's we don't want everybody to understand their power. The reason that I walk into every single room that I walk into with my head high and my chest out, the reason that I know that there is never a room that I'm in that I don't belong in, it's because I know my history. I know what happened. And I know the collective journey that we all have gone on, that everybody should have that same sense of pride and empowerment. It's not that our country's history hasn't been uneven, it has. But I think by being able to understand all the aspects of it, it gives us a better chance to really appreciate the journey that we've been on, how far we have progressed, and also it gives us the power and the encouragement to know that we can actually still do more and we're going to be okay.
So let me ask you, you talk a lot about patriotism. Patriotism as a frame is very much part of your speeches, and I'm interested in people's different frames on what that means to them personally. We see a lot of struggle today over the nation's, icons. It's flag. It's, when to kneel, when to stand. You've got on the Eastern Shore of Maryland someone like Congressman Andy Harris, and maybe this is an unfair comparison. I'd even go with Larry Hogan, someone who's a moderate Republican. How does your patriotism differ from those without that experience that might not have gone to the docks to the steakhouse? How does your patriotism on July 4th, how is it informed differently?
Well, I don't see how you can claim to love the country when you hate half of the people in it. Like, that's not loving the country, right? And I think about this where, I love this country deeply, and I will defend this country, and I have. And I think I served this country in uniform. I served with the 82nd Airborne Division. I served with Airborne. I served with some of the most remarkable men and women that I could ever have the joy of calling my fellow brothers and sisters in arms, and these were people who were patriots. But I also know I was raised by patriots, because I was raised by ministers and teachers. That my grandfather, who was born in this country, but when the Ku Klux Klan made threats to my family to pick up and left the country, much of my family always said they would never come back to the United States, and many did not, but my grandfather did. He always, in all of his humility, he said this country would be incomplete without me. Came back to this country, became a minister just like his father, and even when the same threat started coming to him that came to his father, he stayed and he stuck. He passed away when he was 87 years old. And this man had a deep Jamaican accent his entire life and was maybe the most patriotic American I've ever met. And so when I hear people who are saying that they are claiming to be patriots, when their definition of patriotism is storming the Capitol,
right?
I have a really difficult time. taking the lecture.
So what's the solution? You've talked about service, year of service, and very intriguing. You know, some of us in this town have been around a while, and we kind of remember John McCain talking about national service and other ways to sew the community back together, take the younger generation and attach them to some project that was connected to, you know, American success or improving the nation. You've done some of this in Maryland already. Tell us about it.
So in my first inaugural address, the theme of the inaugural address was, first State of the State address was, service will save us. Service will save us. And one of the first bills that we introduced that I testified on behalf of, that I was very proud to sign, was Maryland is now the first state in the country that offers a service year option for our high school graduates. And so Maryland high school graduates, and also through the Maryland Corps, people who are well past high school graduation, can have a chance to have a year of service to the state of Maryland. And they can choose however they want to do it. They can serve the environment, they can serve older adults, they can serve children, they can serve veterans, they can serve returning citizens. It's completely their choice. And we did it for 3 reasons. One is I'm a big believer in experiential learning. You give young people a path to figure out what makes their heart beat a little bit faster, and they'll do it. The second is I believe in giving people an earned financial cushion for their opportunities, particularly for opportunity youth who oftentimes are looking for some type of pathway and some type of buffer. And if they can earn it, they should receive it. And the third reason, it's because in this time of political divisiveness and political vitriol, that service is sticky. And those who serve together generally stay together. And I know I saw it in my own time in the military. I had people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for my campaign. Many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats. But they came and door knocked on my behalf, simply saying, let me tell you about the guy that I served with. Service will save us. And I think at a time like now, when people seem to care more about who came up with the idea than is it a good idea, if we can actually be a society that gets to know each other again, that's willing to work together, that's willing to fight together. If we do that, then I think our society is going to be just fine.
You have, I don't know how to frame this here. I'm going to experiment. You gave, I think about a year ago, a talk. I would call it the Read My Lips pledge. You know, you got a lot of plans out there, a lot of things you invest in. You want to diminish divides, you know, invest in many folks who've been left behind. That takes money. And nonetheless, you gave the Read My Lips pledge. What was that pledge?
Well, I said that we were going to be a state that was going to be bold, that we were going to be a state that was going to be ambitious, and we're also going to be a state that's going to be fiscally responsible. And I don't think you have to choose.
And not raise any taxes on any Maryland citizens.
Well, I mean, if you look at what we did in our first budget, right? In our first budget,
right,
we were able to do things like pass the Family Prosperity Act, which is able to make permanent child tax credit, increase the earned income tax credit, being able to raise the minimum wage to Maryland for $15. And that is really because, again, I'm a big believer that we should not be disincentivizing work. You cannot have people who are working jobs, and in some cases working multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line. You're going to disincentivize work, and you're not going to create economic opportunities for people. That we were able to do things like increase pathways for people to have economic opportunities, where we have an education system, and I want an education system that's teaching our young people how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. That we made historic investments in apprenticeship programs and trade programs, because while we have some of the best four-year colleges in this country, we are going to end the myth in the state of Maryland that every single one of our children have to attend one of them in order to be economically successful, because they don't. That we're going to increase wealth, and that means the opportunities for home ownership and increasing capital and liquidity for our entrepreneurs. And so people have a chance to pass on something to their children besides debt. And yes, we were able to do all of those things. And by the way, not raise taxes, but provide $200 million in tax cuts to the people of our state. I'm a big believer.
How about the Bay Bridge toll? Is that safe?
Spoken by someone from the Eastern Shore. But here does become the challenge, is that our economy, if you look at the state of Maryland, our economy has been stagnant. The economy in the state of Maryland is the same size as it was in 2018. All right? Pennsylvania's, our neighbor, is $22 billion bigger over the same time period. Maryland's economy has grown by 0.2% over the past 4 years. The average economy in every other state around the country has grown by 7.5. We grew by 0.2 over the past 4-year period.
Who's the villain in that story?
The villain is that our economy is lazy. We're just not investing. You know, we have an economy, you know, as I say, when you look at our state, we have some of the greatest assets that you could ever possibly imagine in the state of Maryland. We are the home of the NSA, we're the home of U.S. Cyber Command, we're the home of Fort Meade, we're the home of dozens of military installations, we're the home of quantum computing, we're the home of some of the top universities in America, 4 of the top HBCUs in this country, we're the home of the Port of Baltimore, we're the home of one of the fastest growing international airports, but we are asset rich and we are strategy poor. You can have all the assets in the world. If you're not leveraging the assets, then you're not growing. And so the thing that we have to be able to do is we need to be more targeted. And again, I don't come from a political world, so I don't understand peanut butter politics of just kind of spreading everything out and just saying, you know, everyone's going to get a little. That doesn't make sense. Show me my assets. Show me the things that I know we can invest in and we can win in, and then invest in that.
My question about those assets, and I thought about this a bit. When I was at the Atlantic, we had a woman there, Olga Kazan, who wrote a story that I highly recommend to all of you because it's still relevant today. It should have been the cover story. It got knocked off by our editor-in-chief for a dumb story. I'll just put it at that. Justin, it was not Justin who did this. It was someone else. But and it was called "Being Black in America Can Be Dangerous to Your Health." And this story profiled this woman. I'm going to get it wrong, but Chiara Bulware, and she was this bright light in this community who came to terms with the fact that she was a young person with massive health problems, and she decided to go on a crusade to get herself healthier and to get her family members healthier, to try and do it. And it kind of takes her through the story in Baltimore of how hard it is to do that, how the cards are stacked against her succeeding, how there's a 20-year life expectancy difference right around Baltimore, Maryland, depending on what zip code you're in.
That's right.
And they're right next to Johns Hopkins. And so what you just described are lots of prominent castles with lots of moats around them. And that was the sense I got, in Maryland, of incredible assets that are disconnected from the realities of their communities. How do you fix that?
Well said. Well said. And it's true. And, I tell you, as a leader, I am data-driven and heart-led. All right, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I acknowledge that, but I don't move without data. And the data on these disparities is staggering. Where you look at a place like Baltimore, and again, this is our state's largest city. Our state's largest city that is also the 7th hottest heat island in the country, right? And that's because of a lack of tree canopy, because of the environmental injustice that continues to sit over the people of Baltimore, the fact that our children in Baltimore have double the asthma rate of anywhere else in the entire state. Now, unless you can tell me that somehow being born in Baltimore means your lungs are just weaker than everyone else's, there's got to be something else going on, right? When you're looking at the income gaps, when you're looking at, you're absolutely right. If you take a look at zip codes in Baltimore, the zip code in Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, and if you look at the zip code of the people who are growing up in Roland Park, that the life expectancy difference between those two is about 20 years. It's about 1.5 miles away from each other. You can't understand what these disparities look like if we aren't able to fully appreciate the measure of intentionality that very much existed in the creation of that, and the lack of intentionality when it comes to how we're going to address it. And part of the thing that we're going to be doing, and part of the things that people will see, is we're going to use data to drive our decisions. And we're going to be able to actually pinpoint and understand, because the data is very clear on what have been some of the most complicated and the most challenged zip codes in our state.
Right.
What have been some of the most challenged neighborhoods in our state?
So
You've got to have a plan to
what are
invest in
some of the best and promising frames for that? I mean, I know for 4 years before you became governor, you were the Robin Hood Foundation.
Yep.
You headed the Robin Hood Foundation, and you raised about $600 million, which you deployed in communities, and the goal is to raise people out of poverty.
Yes.
So the question is, what does raising people out of poverty feel like, look like? What is it in the grit as opposed to just a few words on a sentence? How do you know you've succeeded?
It means investing in every way that is addressing the issues why poverty exists in the first place. Right? It means understanding that you cannot move people out of poverty if you do not have transportation assets. And it's one of the reasons why one of the first things we did was invest in putting the Red Line back on track, which the Red Line is now going to be a historic investment of creating east-west transit within Baltimore and actually being able to move people from where they live to where opportunity lies. You cannot have economic mobility if you do not have physical mobility, right? It means actually making historic investments in our public education system, that you cannot be satisfied with the idea that we have certain children that are not only attending dropout factories, that you have certain children that when it's too hot, they're not able to attend school because of lack of air conditioning, and when it's too cold, they cannot attend school because of a lack of heaters. And think that's somehow being fair.
Is that fixable? I mean, there's a woman named Samantha Holloman in Chestertown who emailed me a question and said, we still have crumbling schools. I mean, I've been reading we've been having crumbling schools every year for like 30 years. Is the crumbling school, decrepit school, the lighting problems, all of that infrastructure fixable in your term?
100%. And it is not something that's going to be acceptable, because everything we are trying to get done, if you don't address some of the ideas of basic infrastructure, if you don't make sure that we have the right kind of curriculum, we're incentivizing educators. One of the first acts that we introduced and I testified on behalf of and then we passed and I signed was something called the Teacher Shortage Act, which was not only making sure that we're addressing the teacher shortage that exists within the state of Maryland, it's that specifically in certain zip codes and in certain areas, the teacher shortage is not just a shortage, it is a massive gulf. And how are you incentivizing some of our best educators to go and teach inside of communities where there is a massive dearth of having high quality educators and high quality teachers inside of the classroom? And so the answer is yes, we can address it, and yes, we have to, and we will, because that is going to be the catalyst in order for our state to get the kind of economic momentum that's going to be necessary for everybody.
You have said, and I was shocked by this, and honestly, I feel like I'm pretty well read, but I was completely ignorant of this, that you're short somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 state employees, or these positions, and you kind of blame Larry Hogan for it, said he did not fill those slots and positions. I think I read that between the lines. And you're a little pissed about it, and now you've got to find these people, and you've said there are morale problems, there are stigma issues, you know, there's it. So I have two questions. One, how are you doing in filling those positions, and isn't it time for AI and automation and some of that?
I mean, it is true. When on day one, I walked into a state government that was, I mean, when you have about 10,000 vacancies in all state government, 6,100 vacancies in the executive branch alone, it's staggering, because it means basic functions were not.
And you've got to do all the work.
Yeah, that's right. We're answering phones, we're doing everything. But it means basic functions were not being performed, right? And people say, well, what does that look like? What it looks like, it means you have people who are waiting 16 months for their unemployment insurance, right? What it looks like, it means people who call 911 and are waiting 40 minutes for a response because we have a massive officer shortage. What it means is that you have hospitals that have a waiting list because of a lack of nurses, right? So when people say, what does that look like and why does that matter? It matters because government's #1 responsibility is to be responsive to the people, and you're not able to do it. And so now I do think that there is, and where automation and AI does become something that I think is important, and we're leaning in, and I think Maryland has a unique opportunity to lean in on this, is going to be this reason, is that we have to be able to get more people who are filling the seats and doing the work. And we have prioritized that amongst our leaders, amongst our cabinet secretaries. We have built, I think, the most talented cabinet in the entire country to a person. And I'm so humbled that people of this caliber continue to raise their hand to serve. And we have to make sure we're getting people back in these seats, yet at the same time, also understand where certain efficiencies can actually be utilized. And so being able to think creatively about—
Efficiencies means AI?
Efficiency means technology assets. You know, AI is a component of that, but also there's a lot of other components that we think can be helpful and supportive.
And you've said you're a data governor, and I remember Mike Bloomberg and other mayors I would interview would talk about the difference between data mayors and non-data mayors. And data mayors could look at the way trucks went through the city and say, wow, I can make $18 million getting trucks to turn a certain way because we've learned that from UPS and we can take that money and apply to school. As a data governor, I mean, two questions. What insights have you gotten from being a data governor about changing it up? And secondly, is the literacy of your team up to that standard?
Yeah, so I'll take the second one first. The literacy of the team is up to the standard because that was also one of the gating criteria that I looked at when I was selecting the team. I needed people that were prepared to move government faster. I needed people that did not want to get into the normal morass of government movements, but who were thinking differently and critically about how to solve problems. And that's why when you look at this, as you look at our cabinet, and again, it's also the most diverse cabinet in the history of the state of Maryland, arguably the most diverse cabinet in the entire country, and we're showing that putting a focus on diversity and a focus on excellence is not a mutually exclusive conversation. You actually can do both. And knowing at the same time that we have some of the country's best social entrepreneurs, best CEOs, who have actually left and said, I'm going to be a cabinet secretary. When I was looking at a chief of staff, and people say, well, you should talk to this person. They were chief of staff to 3 governors before. And I said, I'm just going to go find the best social entrepreneur in the country, and we did, and he's the best chief of staff in the country. Because this government moves differently. We move at a different type of pace. And I do think that's important when it comes to calculating that. And your question about what does it look like? So for example, what it looks like is mechanisms like this. If you're looking at public safety as an issue, and again, I'm a big believer that public safety, there is no higher priority for a chief executive than keeping your people safe. Making sure your people feel safe in their own neighborhoods, in their own skin, in their own communities. And if you take a look at Baltimore, for example, the closure rate inside of the city of Baltimore over the process of the past years hovers around 30%. The closure rate, what that means is when a homicide occurs, what's the chance that person is going to be captured, tried, convicted for that homicide? 30%. That means when a homicide occurred, a person had a better chance of getting away with it than getting captured, tried, and convicted for that homicide. And so my focus, when people came in and they said, well, we need to focus on this, we need to focus on that, it's about sentencing. I said, hold on, that's not what the data says. The data tells me that we should be focusing on certainty of sentencing and not necessarily length of it. Can you capture them in the first place? And that's where things like, can you use technology differently? Can you use data differently? Can you use predictive analysis differently? To be able to say, what can we do to make sure that we're not just being reactive to crimes, but we can be predictive, that we can address it before it even happens. And when you're looking at other jurisdictions where, for example, Las Vegas, their closure rate is 93%.
Wow.
So there's things that you can do, best practices that we can learn from, and it also factored into, when I talk about predictive analysis, that doesn't just mean the usages of technology. It also means things like, you know what I never see? I never see an honor roll student who is graduating first in their class who is ending up in the juvenile justice system. Invest in making sure you're creating new opportunities for our young people. Invest in making sure that they have pathways to their long-term success. Because if you show me a community that has given up hope, you're showing me a community that is going to be a violent one. And you have to be able to address that one as well.
Do you worry that there's another Freddie Gray incident out there? Do you worry that police reform has not gone anywhere near where it needs to go after some of the, it doesn't always make the news, but the long, long line of killings of black individuals, both men and women, in horrific cases, it's continuing today. It's just not on the front page every day. And I'm just interested in to what degree, and I remember interviewing Chris Christie, and Chris Christie told me, Dan Camden, they had to tear that police department down to its foundation and rebuild it, get rid of people, retrain. He said, Steve, we have rot throughout the U.S. policing system. A lot of people aren't honest and direct about it. How do you feel about Maryland's policing system?
No, and he's not only correct, and again, I know he wasn't just talking about New Jersey. This is about how do you come up with an entire policing system that moves with appropriate intensity, absolute integrity, and full accountability, right? That's the standard. Appropriate intensity, absolute integrity, full accountability. And when you look at the things that have happened within the policing force, I mean, the Baltimore Police Department is still under a consent decree. So it's still currently working with the federal government to be able to come up with reforms. If you look at the adjustments that have been made within policing and the adjustments that have made, including things like mandatory body cameras, right? Things that have happened over the process of the past few years that were not there, that were important investments that we're gonna make. Mandatory training when it comes to how exactly to proceed and how exactly to intercede when people were called in. Those were all things that were important. I think there was also two things that we had to address, though, when it comes to policing. One is you've got to address the fact that we're asking police to do everything, right? That we're asking police to be the social workers, we're asking police to come and to respond to every single situation, when that, in many cases, that's not the most appropriate place for a police officer to have to respond to. When you consider the fact that, for example, 71%, going back to data, 70% of 911 calls have some form of mental health component or mental health break to it. Is that the right or the most appropriate place for law enforcement to be able to enter into always? Not necessarily. So it's doing things like making historic investments in the crisis intervention teams, like we made in the state of Maryland, where you're having appropriate people responding to the appropriate situations. The second piece, though, is when I say we're asking police to respond to everything, here's also what I mean. Take a look at Freddie Gray as an example, where we spent appropriately a large amount of time dealing with the last 25 minutes of his life. What happened during that time? But we never spent the appropriate amount of time dealing with what happened in the first 25 years. Dealing with the fact that this was a child who was born to a mother who had lived in extreme poverty for all of her life, battled addiction for much of her life. By the time he was born, he was already exposed to heroin. That he was born underweight and premature. When he finally gained enough weight to leave the hospital, they moved into a housing project in West Baltimore in Sandtown, Winchester, in Holland Park. That house, along with 400 other homes, were cited in a class action lawsuit because of the endemic levels of lead that were inside that home, and showing that the CDC indicates that if a person has 0.2 milligrams of lead in their blood, they're going to have chronic challenges throughout their life. Freddie Gray had 36, right? So we're talking about a person who was born premature, underweight, born into deep poverty, exposed to heroin, and lead poisoned. And by that time, he's 2 years old. Tell me, what is police supposed to do with that? If you really want to address policing reform, we have to make sure that our police officers are moving with accountability. We have to make sure that they're using appropriate intensity. We have to make sure that we are getting the right people on the force and we are getting the wrong people out and making sure they're being held account for their actions. And at the same time, if you really want to support law enforcement, you've got to address the conditions that we are repeatedly asking law enforcement to deal with, but simply just saying that, but it's just them, it's up to them to fix it. They can't fix that.
Right.
And as a society, we need to be honest about that.
Let me ask you, thank you very much for that. Let me ask you about a question, and I'm going to go to all of you soon, and we're going to do this lightning round. So we're going to try to take as many questions as we can, make them super short, or I'm going to whack you and whack them off. We're on screen, a lot of folks watching online. We're going to go lightning round, lightning questions, lightning answers. But I am interested in your views of your party. And I've been trying to figure out whether you are a loyal Democrat or a disruptive and revolutionary Democrat. Are you a different kind of person, who's going to call it as it is, or are you a person who's going to say, okay, you've got a certain structure there? And when I look at the fact that if an election were held tomorrow between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they'd basically tie each other in the popular vote. So what is the Democratic Party failing to do that you think needs to be done to connect with more Americans than they are now? Because clearly, there's a big chunk of the country that doesn't buy at least one of the choices in your party. I mean, everybody says that Joe Biden should be doing better, or that the party should be doing better than it is. And I'm just interested in why you think it's not.
So, I mean, I don't come from a political background. I didn't come from a party structure.
But you're in it now.
I'm in it now, but I mean, but let's be honest, I was also never a party choice, right? I mean, I ran in a primary where we were running against, statewide elected officials.
Yeah.
We were running against 2 cabinet secretaries. We were running against the former head of the party.
How'd that, I know how it went, but how do you feel?
Well, I was really one of the people I was running against was a member of my board, which made board meetings very awkward. So I was never a party. I was never the person the party tapped. So I guess it's difficult for me to identify where do I fall. But I tell you what's not difficult for me is you are not going to find a more vocal supporter of President Biden than me. And the reason I say is because I'm on the ground. I see the work. I mean, when you think about what we've gotten done in these past 9 months, we're now in the state of Maryland, in just my time in 9 months as governor, we have announced over close to 31,000 new jobs in the state of Maryland. We're now going on 5 straight months of historically low unemployment in our state. We're now building roads and tunnels and infrastructure to include things like the Red Line that I mentioned before that is going to have transformational, generational impact when it comes to economic mobility, particularly economic mobility for communities that have historically been left behind. That we just made a $267 million announcement investment with the federal government that is going to make sure that by the end of my first term, I want broadband in every corner of our state, from Oakland, Maryland to Ocean City, everywhere in between, that we want broadband access that is affordable and accessible, and we are going to make that happen. That we said that we want Maryland to be the offshore wind capital of this globe, that we raised our goal to go to 8.5 gigawatts for offshore wind, which is going to be enough to power over 3 million homes in the state of Maryland alone, that we are going to make Maryland 100% clean energy by 2035, that Maryland is moving, and Maryland is moving fast. And you know why this matters? None of that will be real without President Biden. Let's be clear. When I talk about my support for this administration, it's not because of party. It's not because it's partisan. It's because it's results in just 9 months. And so frankly, when I do hear the arguments when people say, well, we need to get excited because democracy is on the line, and all of that is very true. I mean, you don't need to look much further than what's going on right now to understand that democracy actually is on the line. I get that. But I'm not excited to support President Biden because I'm fearful about what the alternative is. I'm excited to support President Biden because I say to myself, look at the first 9 months. Imagine if you give me 4 more years of this. What's that going to mean for the people of our state? What's that going to mean for the folks in Chestertown and Hagerstown and West Baltimore and Largo? What's that going to look like if you can give me 4 more years of this kind of momentum, of this kind of attention, the fact that the president has been to our state on multiple occasions? That's the partner I want, and that's the partner that I need.
Anything his team can do just a little better?
I don't think it's about, I think what we really need to do is we need to be honest about the things that are happening within our own jurisdictions.
Right.
So when we're going around the state of Maryland and we're talking about these issues, I'm very clear that these things are happening in partnership with the Biden administration. That it's the Biden administration that's actually helping to bring the momentum, bring the energy, bring the capital. All of these things that we're working on to get done, it's being done with a measure of partnership. And I just think we need to be unapologetic and loud about that.
Right. Well, I want to go to the audience. I know there's so many topics we didn't get to, like climate, and, are we entering another period of COVID and how you're going to respond? All that. You have an incredible number of plans, and I would like to talk to you about the environmental course, the Chesapeake Bay, et cetera. Yeah. But I promised we would get to the audience. So I'm going to go to Stacy first. So Stacy, are you ready? You got nothing? He answered all your questions already? Oh, it's going to be an opportunity to, as Rachel Maddow said, fight back. Yeah. Well, great. Well, it's great Great to see you.
Thank you,
Jonathan
guys.
is awesome.
Thank you.
Jonathan's here.
Yes,
All right,
please.
so I'm going to open. I rarely do this. Going to open up. Greg, you got a question? Okay, but we're online, so we need to get a mic over to you. This is Greg Craig. I got to tell you something great about Greg Craig's wife. She paints and is one of the most successful postage stamp creators of the artwork on postage stamps. I love it. So anyway, Greg.
And a great lawyer. Good to see you, Greg.
Governor, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Data is also used to measure performance, and that's an important use of data. Could you identify 4 or maybe even 5 data points that we should look at in 3 years to determine whether you've been successful in what you've been telling us about today?
Great question.
Great question. Thank you. And thank you for all your leadership and work, too. We've actually, in fact, now have a chief performance officer inside of our state, and Asma is just absolutely remarkable, who is not just going to be, keeping us on task, but keeping us honest in all of this and making sure that we're being transparent.
Does this person give you like a report card?
That's exactly right.
Huh?
Because we need to
Weekly, monthly?
Yeah, well, it's monthly, but it's on a whole collection of different tasks, and she's actually working closely with all of our cabinet secretaries, because I'm just a big believer in this idea of what gets measured matters, and what matters gets measured.
So what are the few of the measures?
So one, are we creating a safe where people are safer? Are we creating a state where people are safer? People need to feel safer, and so when you're looking and tracking where we are in terms of homicides, non-fatal shootings, all the basic indicators of violence, that we take that seriously. In fact, I look at those measurements every single day, and I'm proud of the fact that, Maryland went 8 straight years, where you're looking at the homicide rate in our state, nearly doubled over 8 straight years. 8 straight years in the state of Maryland. The non-fatal shooting rate doubled in the state of Maryland. Baltimore City, 8 straight years, had 300 plus homicides. 8 straight years, right? Wow. This year, we're talking about data and data and measurement. We're now going on where not just is the homicide rate in the state of Maryland down, the homicide rate in Baltimore City is down nearly 25% right now. And we're watching that, and we're watching where other states are shooting up. Same thing, non-fatal shootings down around 20%, where we are seeing how there is a fear that's being broken, and we know we have a lot more work to do, but the only reason and the only way we're going to do it is you got to keep tracking the data, figuring out what's working, figuring out what's not working, and make those adjustments. So a state that is going to be safer, a state that our economy gets moving, and we make sure that we're having measurements of economic growth, and that addresses and deals with a lot of the other topics that we're talking about. A state that's more sustainable, and when we're talking about things like climate and clean energy, infrastructure, our buildings, our mass transit, are we having a state that we can actually say quantifiably is more sustainable than the state we had before? And then the fourth piece, that we're going to be a state that serves. And when I talk about a state that serves, that doesn't just mean a rebuilding of state government. Because I'm actually not interested in rebuilding someone else's government. I'm actually figuring out how exactly do we re-engineer government that makes it work for people in a better way, but also creating a greater sense of engagement, creating a greater sense of touch point, increasing opportunities for people to be able to participate in their democracy and participate in their society. If we can do those things and all the umbrellas that fall under it, make it the state safer, make it more economically competitive, make it more sustainable, and create the state that serves, we're then able to show these are the metrics that I want people to be able to match us on and show were we able to do our job.
I want to go to Jason Grimet here, but as you know, right here in the middle, folks, please, Jessica in the middle, Jason right there. But as I'm asking this, I know that Maryland is well on its way to being one of the clean energy states, entirely by 2035. And not to anticipate, Jason, but are you kind of screwed by your neighbors when it comes to grids and other things? How much do you have to like Virginia? How much do you have to like Delaware? I mean, and is there, any kind of camaraderie in terms of building the infrastructure that you don't control? But Jason, you can just jump on that and tell me how it was wrong.
Well, first of all, look, let me just say that I've been to a lot of these. You guys are both exceptional at this. I can't remember a 40-minute conversation in which every single minute was substantive and interesting. And that's to defer away from your question, Steve. So, Governor, look, you name-checked offshore wind, right? Huge opportunity. A single one of these facilities can hire 20,000 people in construction, right? You try to start up Sparrow Point, which has been a shuttered steel mill. Future very bright. You made a huge commitment. I can tell you from the American Clean Power Association, day-to-day is pretty gritty. The industry's in real trouble. There's a real question about whether they're going to keep the investment here in the U.S. And so you've talked about the partnership with the administration. Clearly, rhetorically, very strong supporters here. Are you feeling the whole of government approach? Are you feeling the urgency in that federal-state partnership to actually keep this on track?
And you can still comment whether you like Delaware and Virginia.
Yeah, no, actually, I think a lot of them tie. And by the way, I want to compliment the frame of the question as well, because do I believe that we need to be more aggressive when it comes to addressing climate goals? Absolutely. Do I think we're dealing with an existential threat? 100%. I represent a state that is 70% either waterlined or waterlogged. Right. So anyone who's trying to tell me that climate change is a hoax, I would love for you to spend a little bit of time with me, because when I'm going out in communities, nobody is saying that in our state, because we're seeing the impacts every single day. But let's be clear, this is about economics too, right? This is about the economic revolution that is taking place with clean energy, and I want Maryland to be at the forefront of it. The same way the Sparrows Point, you mentioned Sparrows Point, the same way that American steel and that Maryland steel helped to literally win World War II and power an entire generation economically, I want Maryland wind to take on that next role in this next century. And so this is as much about economics as it is anything else. Do I feel the sense of partnership? Well, actually, let me come in on dovetail. And you're absolutely right. This is not something and can't be something that is just Maryland, right? Our regional partnerships do matter in all of this. And having friends in Delaware and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Virginia, that does matter to us, because we have to be able to lead, but also leading can't mean that you're standing alone.
Right.
And so on everything from how we're thinking about offshore to how we are thinking about the preservation of the Chesapeake Bay and making sure that we're honoring our commitments to make sure that we have a clean bay, fully funding the Bay Restoration Fund, being able to come up with new incentives and new investments that's going to make sure we have a clean bay. Yes, these are things that Maryland's going to lead on, but we are going to need a strong sense of partnership from our neighbors, and I think that's important. And I'll just touch base on the federal side. Do I think that the federal commitment is there? Absolutely. And you know, Jason, I'm in the weeds on this stuff. I was literally on the call about this issue with the White House yesterday, literally yesterday. So I'm thankful that we have a partner that we're engaging with. I'm thankful that we have a partner that hears us and is hearing from us. And I do believe deeply that in partnership, we are going to be able to get to the long-term goal that we're hoping to secure.
Interesting. Right here, right in the middle here, this young lady, and then all the way in the back. Jessica, can you go in the very back, please?
Hi,
Tell us who you are.
Oh, my name is Lena. I'm an intern at Representative Carter's office.
Hey, Lena.
This is my first time at one of these meetings, and it's very exciting.
How's it feel so far?
I feel a lot more important now.
I love that. She's like, I'm realizing how needed I am. Lena, you're awesome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. So recently, the crime rate for the United States came out, and Baltimore was #1. And I know you touched on how you wanted to reduce that crime rate, but I was wondering if you had any specific plans at the moment.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. And I tell you, when we talk about why this becomes so important, I have to tell you, I love my whole state, all 24 jurisdictions. But I'm a Baltimorean. That's who I am. Can't understand me if you don't understand Baltimore. And I remember literally, I came off the campaign trail last year, actually maybe a little over a year now, because a woman at my church, I go to church in East Baltimore, she was a 69-year-old grandmother who was working as a custodian in the church. And I came off the campaign trail and went to speak at her vigil, spend time, because she was killed in the church bathroom. A 69-year-old grandmother. This issue is real, and it's far too real for many families. And the way we are approaching it, not just Baltimore, but really throughout the entire state, is we're taking an all of the above approach. Because one thing that I tell you, and one of the reasons I decided to get into public office, I was tired of hearing people coming up with these one-frame solutions that not just didn't work, never had an intention of working. It was pacifying, and it was insulting to communities that actually continue to deal with this pain. And so when we talk about an all-of-the-above approach, it means things like, we made historic investments in local law enforcement, put $122 million into local law enforcement to include $17.5 million in Baltimore City alone, because one of the challenges we have is there is a significant officer shortage. And we have to make sure that we are creating pipelines and filling the ranks with good, qualified, trained law enforcement who are there then able to do the job. That it meant that we had to support, and I made record investments in something called the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, which is really the governor's main tool for intelligence sharing, making sure jurisdictions are working together. Because part of the thing is that we have the data, we have the intelligence, but if it's not being shared with local jurisdictions, and if they're not sharing intelligence and sharing insights, that you'll continue having these things fall through the cracks. We made historic investments in organized crime unit because we have to focus and get these illegal guns out of our neighborhoods. 65% of the guns that are recovered in Baltimore City, it's not that they're not from Baltimore, they're not from Maryland. These things are being trafficked into our communities. And these illegal guns and these gun trafficking rings have got to be addressed, and they've got to be stopped. That we've got to keep these violent offenders off of our streets. And specifically these repeat violent offenders who continue to terrorize neighborhoods. But when I say all of the above, it means that we also made record investments in our public schools. It means we put over $100 million direct investment into behavioral health, over $1.3 billion total, because you have to deal with the mental health challenges that people are facing. That when it comes to public safety, it's never just simply going to be about how are we putting more cops on a beat, right? It's about how are you changing the entire ecosystem that people live in, that people exist in, to know that when people are, in particular these repeat violent offenders, that they have to be dealt with. And at the same time, we've got to create a better environment for people to be able to live and exist in their societies where they don't find that as the best option available to them.
Right. In the very back, yes.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a Baltimore resident, West Baltimore. My name is Veronica Macbeth, and I'm a little bit of a transportation walk, so I have a
Real quick.
multi-part question. Hopefully you can answer it quickly. My question is, what are your thoughts or plans as far as like short-term, mid-term, and maybe long-term plans as it relates to sustainability and transportation in Baltimore? And just one step further, as far as transit-oriented development, there are tons of food deserts and things like that. So would love to hear about that.
Thank you. And I'm going to take this gentleman right here before we close out, because we're right near the end. We're going to bring you the mic up here. Jessica, I just want you to get your steps in. I know it's a challenge every day. No, I'm just joking. Here we go. This gentleman right up front. Real quick, yeah.
Yeah. A follow-up transportation question. The Purple Line. It's been going on for a long, long time, as you know.
Oh, yes.
And what I'd like to know is an update on the Purple Line, and what are you going to do about the commitment that was originally made that there would be a pedestrian and bicycle path along that? The county executive seems to be reneging on that commitment.
Okay. Specific transportation questions, Governor.
I love it. I love both these questions, and I'll see if I can capture them both. So first on the transportation-oriented development and what's happening with West Baltimore, part of the reason that I am so bullish on mass transit is we have got to get ourselves out of a mechanisms where we are exclusively focusing on single occupancy vehicles as a way of moving people around. It's not just damaging for the environment unless you're able to actually address some of these other roads, bridges, et cetera. It's economically damaging, psychologically damaging. So I'm very big on being able to focus on mass transit. If you look at things like the Red Line and we're pulling together, we actually have a rapid bus transit that's working right now in preparation for, as we're building the Red Line, to be able to increase speed and in order to increase predictability for people who are living in those areas. And the transit-oriented development becomes really important because if you look at the lines that we have on board and the lines where we that we are now estimating that's going to happen for the Red Line, for example, our intention of being able to focus housing, developments, real estate on those areas become crucial because it also incentivizes a user base. So that's the best way of making that not just the most economically sustainable way, it's also the way of being able to address the environmental concerns and being able to focus on one of my goals, which is we've got to reduce the reliance on vehicles in order for people to be able to move around. How that also relates to the Purple Line, and just for a 20-second context, the Purple Line is a long-time rail project that's around in the DC suburbs that my predecessor has pulled together and greenlit around the same time that he dismissed the Red Line and killed the Red Line. But the challenge of the Purple Line is it has been years delayed and literally hundreds of $millions overrun. So there's a lack of confidence that people have that this thing is going to get done and that it's going to get done correctly. One thing that I want people to know in our time is, in our time, Maryland does big things, and in our time, we make sure we're going to hit deadlines. And I'm very committed to that. We are going to get the Purple Line done. We've not just continued a commitment to be able to push forward on not just a timeline and what we think is going to be the economically feasible way of doing it. The other pieces of the pedestrian walkways and that type of thing, those are all things we're working in coordination with our local jurisdictions to be able to add and manifest, because I believe in multimodal forms of transportation on the transportation investments that we are making. So we're working in coordination with the local jurisdictions to make those things reality.
Governor, I'm going to end with a human question. In your book, The Other Westmore, you kind of lay out how stars aligned right for you to have. I mean, you can kind of look at the fragility that many people who don't have those stars line up have in their lives. And let's just face it, if you're white, if you're a guy, if you're a family of means, you can screw up a lot and you can still win. But if you're not in those categories, you don't have the buffers, you don't have the choices. And I'm interested in not talking just to those people who have the cards stacked against them, but everyone. What's the most important thing? Because I think that you coming into the governorship is very powerful, but it's something you said you couldn't even take, that you can't take that trail that you had for granted. I'm just interested in what insights you want to tell people on how to make this life matter, to align the stars right for more people, to understand that opportunity is fragile.
And that I've been very blessed and very lucky, but luck shouldn't be a prerequisite. That should not be the prerequisite for success. And I tell you, and you spoke of the book The Other Westmore. I remember a conversation that I was having with Wes when I first was getting to him, and we were sitting across from each other, and I think he was in year 3 or year 4 of his life sentence, and we were talking actually about our communities that we grew up in and the communities we lived in, and I asked him, I said, do you think there were products of our environments? Because I'd always heard that so much when I was growing up. People are products of their environments, people are products of their, and I heard it so much that I never challenged it, right? You just kind of accept it. And I said to him, I said, do you think there were products of our environments? And he looked at me and he said, actually, I think we're products of our expectations. And as soon as he said that, I remember sitting back and thinking to myself, he's absolutely right. That we weren't products of our environments, we were products of our expectations. And that the expectations that people have of themselves, they don't come from nowhere. The expectations people have of themselves, they come from the expectations that other people have of them. And they internalize them. And they make them their own. And the reason that we are moving with this sense of urgency, the reason that we're investing in communities that have historically been neglected, We can't pretend like the people who are growing up in those neighborhoods that they don't know that too. That there are individuals who grow up in neighborhoods that have been neglected, and they know that that neglect was a choice. So what do you think their expectations are for themselves and their success? And so the thing that I want people to know is that we're products of our expectations. And so I think it's really important that we think about not just the expectations that we have for ourselves, but we think about the expectations that we're setting up for the people around us too, because they're going to act accordingly based on what they're seeing around them.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Wes Moore, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.